Thank you for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm very excited today to bring you an interview with a writer who has an exciting new project out, and a lot of exciting projects, actually, when you start digging through Philip Harris's bio. And I'm very happy to have you on the show today, Philip. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Philip, as you know, you're a listener of the show, and I start each show with some variation of the question of how you got started. So tell the audience kind of what was that first spark that let you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, to be honest, I'm probably going to go with the old cliche in that I've always told stories, which is pretty much what everyone says.
Right.
I think probably, when I was kind of 7, 8, that kind of age, I used to actually kind of lie in bed and just make up stories. At that time, we lived across the road, literally across the road from a library. So I read plenty of books, and I used to read things like Swallows and Amazons and Famous Five and kind of adventure books like that. And then I would go to bed and I'd be trying to get to sleep, and I would make up these stories about me, being heroic and fighting off the bad guys in the wood just down the road from our house and ending up with the cute girl and kind of it kind of followed on from then, and as I got older, I just used to make up stories, and I used to, occasionally down, and when I was at school, I was, for our exam, one of our exams in the UK, you have an exam when you're 16, and there's an essay question, and you get, 4 or 5 different choices of that. And one of the options there is always a short story. So obviously I chose that one. I think it was called The Woman in the Window or something like that. And I think I wrote a ghost story. And it just kept doing it. As I got older, I got a real job. I'm a software engineer, but the writing was always in the background. And as I got kind of into my 20s, I started really writing short stories with a view to maybe getting them published and sending them out. So I used to write stories, and I would send them out, and they would get rejected because they were rubbish. And most of them were rubbish. But I actually got fairly quickly, probably after a couple of years, I got an acceptance for a short story in a magazine called Peeping Tom, which is a very, very well known. Probably didn't sell a lot of copies, but it won awards and things. And this was back in the day when magazines actually came on paper, and they were photocopied and stapled together, and they were generally called fanzines. He accepted a story of mine called Letter from a Victim, and I think he paid me £2.50 for that, which is pretty cool. And I still have the check. Actually, I didn't cash it. And from then on, I just kind of kept writing stories and would submit them every now and again. Life got in the way, and there would be time when I didn't write stories, but it was always there in the background, really.
You said that it was a cliche that a lot of guests on the show have said, and I like to think that it's more of kind of an inside joke than a cliche. But nearly every guest that comes on says, well, I've just always been a writer. It's just always been there. That still fascinates me when people say that. And I say the same thing, so it shouldn't. But, we have this kind of idea that we are unique and special, and we kind of stumbled onto this, like no one else has.
Yes, yeah.
It just still... it kind of gets me a little excited when I hear people say, well, I've just always been a writer. It's just always been there. And I love to hear people's opinion about whether you think it is a gift or if it is a talent that is cultivated or if it's somewhere in between. I know that we all feel like we were just always writers, but is that something you're born with, or is it something that that there was a spark there that just kind of got tended and grown? Do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's a mix of both. I honestly believe that I think that people have something that they're good at. I really think that everybody has something they're good at. Whether that's piano playing or singing, or maybe it's just they're really good at being friendly, and so they're great working in a shop, and they run a flower shop and they love their customers and they know all their customers. They're good at that kind of thing. Um, you know, Now, whether or not my talent is a writer, I'll leave it to other people to decide that. But I think there's an element of that. There's an element of how you're kind of drawn just naturally to doing certain things. But I also think that it's something that you have to learn and you have to practice, and it won't just magically happen. I think there's different types of people when it comes to writing or any kind of creative endeavor. You've got, people who would like to do something, people who would like to be a writer or a singer or whatever, and they never really do it. Even if they've got talent, they don't really get round to it. And then you've got people who want to be a writer, or want to be a singer, and maybe they do write some stuff. And I was in this phase for quite a long time where I was just writing stories, and I quite like the idea of being a writer, and maybe one day I'd get something published and write a novel or that kind of thing. But they don't really get a lot of traction with it. You don't necessarily become a success. Maybe they're lucky and they do, but generally not. And then there's the third type, and these are the people that are successful to me, and it's the people who need to be a writer, or they need to be a singer, or they need to do that thing, and they're just drawn to it. And I tried to give it writing many times, because it was from a career point of view, it's a terrible idea. Hardly
Yes.
anyone makes any money as a writer, let's face it. But I just kept being drawn to it, and it felt like it was something that I needed to do. And I read a lot of blogs of authors, and it's a theme I see quite a lot. And from some of them, they're like, I hate writing. It's terrible. My life is a misery because I'm a writer, but I can't do anything else because I need to write. And I think people who are drawn to it that much, they're the ones that are really successful and write those books and turn that small spark of talent. Some people are super talented. The first thing they write is amazing. And there's writers out there that I'm scared to read their stuff because it's so good that it just makes me want to quit. But then for the majority of people, it takes work and it takes practice, and you've got to build up those skills and build that spark. But so I think it's really a combination of the two.
And I think that's another recurring theme that people can't not write. Ted Kosmatka was on the show a couple weeks ago and told that story about that he had tried and finally just gave up and said, I just can't do this. I'm not good at it. Obviously, no one wants my work, so I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to do something else. And he actually couldn't stop. He had to write a story just to get it out of his head. And then he said, well, I've got this finished story. I might as well try to sell it. And that's the story that sold. And that's that other recurring theme, is that we all say we've just always been writers, and then everyone tries to walk away from it, and you just can't.
Yes, yeah.
That's so great. But you said that you this was something that you had an aptitude for, or had a desire for, and started working it, but life got in the way. You got a real job. You're a software engineer by day?
Yes. So I work in the video game industry, so that's quite a big drain on time. And I've built a pretty good career at that. So, it's then hard to come home and then write. But again, you're coming back to that. It's something you need to do. You find the time to do it.
Right. Do you find any correlation between those two work endeavors, the analytical side with software engineering and I'm doing air quotes here, the creative side with writing? Is there any overlap there? Do you think one complements the other?
I've always gravitated towards the video game development side of it, and I think that is because of the creative piece of it, without a doubt. when I first started programming, which was a very long time ago, um, my dad brought home this little computer. It got 1K of memory, which is what I think 8 tweets worth of memory or something.
Right.
And
What machine was it?
It was a ZX81,
Ah,
which was released in 1981, hence the name. I don't know if we
nice.
had it. I don't know if it came out in the US, but it was a very 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 popular thing in the UK.
Yeah, I had
Um,
one similar, a Timex Sinclair 1000 with
yes, yeah,
1K of memory. I think
yeah.
they were had that same Motorola processor.
Yes, I think they're basically the same thing. They were just rebranded
Right.
version, I think. So I got that, and I would use that to write games, and very small, simple games, but games nonetheless. And then as I grew up, I moved on to a ZX Spectrum, which is kind of like the bigger brother of the ZX81, which I think there was a US version as well. And that I used to write old text adventure games. So for those of you not old enough to remember them, they were basically kind of like the choose your own adventure book. It would come up on the screen and it would say, oh, you're in a cave and there's a flashlight, and you would say, okay, turn on the flashlight, and say, okay, this flashlight is on. Now you can see you have an exit north and an exit east, and you would say, go east, and you would tell these stories, and I used to create those, and there was various programs you could get that would help you make these adventure stories. So even then, I was kind of writing stories, but still doing the programming. So since then, I've moved into the games industry, which is a very creative industry, and I'm still I'm a software engineer, so I do the technical, logical piece of it, but I tend to be on the gameplay side of things, which is where we're making up the artificial intelligence or we're making up the stories, and video games are a very collaborative process, so they throw out ideas. We as a team, we throw out ideas and we try to work together on the game. So I don't know that there's necessarily a correlation between the writing and the programming, but certainly the direction I've taken my programming is influenced by the writing and the creativity. There's no way I would want to work in a bank. That would just kill me. And I think you're working in video games, you get that blend of the programming, but there's story, and even I've worked on quite a few sports games, but we worked on a boxing game that had an entire story that was basically a film, and we had a Hollywood script writer in, and he wrote the script for that. I've written scripts for games, and actually had them recorded by like TV actors come in and read my script, which was strange and very cool. So there's definitely overlap, and the programming itself is very structured. So I think the creativity, I kind of rebel against that to do the writing.
Yeah. But I think that's a great outlet that a lot of people don't consider is that, when you're a creative person, you can bring that creative outlook to things to no matter what your day job is. And if you look for opportunities, you can use these everyday things, if we want to call it that, to kind of sharpen our craft. And there are opportunities everywhere if we just open our eyes and look.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's telling people about it, and letting people know that, hey, you're interested in this kind of thing and you have that creative side. I mean, I didn't talk about my writing a lot, much at all, until a couple of years ago, and I was chatting to someone at a party, and I happened to mention, he asked me about something because I used to be in a band, and he was asking me about that, and why I liked being in the band. And I said, well, I like writing the songs, and I would sing them. I'm a really really bad singer, but I really like writing the songs. And he said, oh yeah, I didn't know that. I said, yeah, well, I write stories, and it just kind of came out. And he hangs out with guys like in the theater crowd and that kind of stuff. So we got talking about stories, and he was just interested in what I was doing. So it kind of leaked out, and then with the indie publishing and that kind of thing, and I've started talking about it now, and I've been surprised actually at how kind of interested and supportive people are, and just how cool people see being a writer. I mean, I've been doing it 20 30 years, and I write these stories and hopefully they're pretty good, but people see that and they read the stories, and they're kind kind of they think it's cool, and to me it's very everyday, but to them it's something unusual and unique. So I think letting people know that you have that creative side and showing people what you're doing, there's you get a positive benefit from that as well.
Sure. So after you got the story published in Peeping Tom, what did that do for your confidence as a writer?
It helped a lot, and it took a long time. I mean, this was back when you used to have to mail out stories. You would print them out, and you write a little letter and a return envelope, and you would mail them out, and then you would wait. And I think it took a year for him to get back to me about this story. And I'm very stubborn, so I just left it and just waited in the hope that eventually he would get back to me. And this was it was a very short story. It was a 600-word story, which now we would call flash fiction.
Right.
But back then there was no such thing as flash fiction. And the acceptance note actually said, this is a great story. It's probably the best short story I've ever read. So it wasn't flash. It was like a short story. So I don't quite know. I mean to do some research and work out when flash fiction came into being. But so he really liked it, and it appeared in this magazine, and it had the magazine had won some awards. So that definitely kind of gave me a bit of encouragement. But then it was a long time before I got another acceptance. So and again with getting a real job and working in that kind of thing, you kind of lose momentum and do lose confidence a bit. But I kept writing and I kept sending out, and I'd occasionally get comments, and they'd point out why this was a terrible story. And more recently, I've started studying the craft more and started thinking about the stories more. It used to be that I would just think of something very, very simple and then just sit down and write a story, and so I would be, oh, there's a guy in hospital and there's a monster in the ceiling. Okay, right, I'll write that. And I would just sit down and I would write that story, and it would be 2,000 words of a guy getting eaten by a monster from a ceiling in a hospital bed. And funnily enough, that one never got published. But over the last kind of 4 or 5 years, I've been taking it a lot more seriously and listening to podcasts and listening to things like Writing Excuses, where they're talking about craft, and trying to think about the writing much more, looking at other books and other stories that people have read and think about, okay, why is this good? Why is Neil Gaiman so good with his stories? And just putting more effort into thought about it. And I would get encouragement from, still rejections, but I would get encouragement. And every now and again, I would get a story accepted in an anthology or on a website or something like that. And that would be just enough for me to think, okay, maybe I should keep trying this.
Yeah, and speaking of Writing Excuses, that's a fantastic podcast to listen to. It comes out each Monday.
Yes. Yeah.
With Brandon Sanderson, Dan Wells, Howard Taylor, and Mary Robinette Kowal. And Dan Wells was on this podcast on episode 10, so be sure to check that out. It's there are lots and lots of opportunities for authors to get encouragement, instruction. Way more so than in years past. I mean, there literally is more advice than you can process at your fingertips right now. There are more podcasts, more books that have been published by self-published authors, meaning they can come to market much more quickly. I mean, we have a glut of writing advice. Literally at our fingertips.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I hope that means more people are motivated and encouraged to try their hand at it, and I think so. But what was it that got you? So you had some success and you kept at it, but when did it come to you that, okay, I'm gonna seriously pursue this, and I'm gonna start really trying to get my work published in other places? Did you kind of have an aha moment? Was there a time when your confidence reached a point that you said, I'm gonna seriously have a go at this?
I think it was a bunch of different things. I mean, it was certainly I was getting enough consistent kind of success. I think I've had about 20 short stories published now in websites, but there was also a couple of anthologies, and one story I wrote called The Bone Boy, which appeared in an anthology called Bones, which is probably one of my favorite short stories that I've written. And it just kind of really clicked, and I put into action all the stuff that I'd been listening to on writing excuses and that kind of thing, and wrote a story that I thought was really good. So there was that. I was getting enough feedback on the one or two stories that I was writing. Um, my wife is a huge supporter, and she was encouraging me to do it, to write and try and make a go of it, kind of thing. And I was also, I just got fed up with giving up, if that makes sense. I was
Yes.
kind of living in this limbo land where it's like, well, I really, really want to do this writing. I need to do this writing, but it's stupid. Like I said, I grew up around books and read a lot, and love writing and love reading. But as I said, it's never really seemed like a real career. It was always something that other people did. It was even a long time, even really, until I thought about authors behind books. They were just books to me, and I read Clive Barker's Cabal when I was in college, and for some reason, I think I hadn't really read much for quite a while, and I suddenly found this book and loved it, and it just clicked that actually there was this guy, Clive Barker, and he lived in England, and he was a writer, and he writes all this amazing stuff, and he's a real person. But it was still, for a long time, it wasn't a career that you could earn a living at. The chances of, even if you write an amazing book, the chances of it being picked up by a publisher are so tiny that don't quit your day job is that standing thing. And I have a niece who writes,
Philip?
and she's just about a writer, very slim. So, but I'd been living in that limbo land for so long that I was kind of just fed up of not really making a go of the writing and not really trying. So I decided, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I decided that I would start writing novels, which I tried one or two novels, but not really seriously. And I would start writing every day, and I would submit more, and I would take it more seriously, and really not still even then not because I necessarily think it would make a career, but because I enjoy it, and I didn't want to just ignore that anymore. So that's what I did. I started writing every day, and short stories, but also started writing novels and that kind of thing. And I still write every day, and I immerse myself. I mean, coming back to the podcast and things like that, I make a point of immersing myself in the writing. I listen to the podcasts, I listen to author stories, I listen to Author Strong. I read blogs and that kind of thing. And so on a regular basis, I'm always thinking about writing and that kind of stuff. So it doesn't kind of get forgotten, because if you skip writing, or you stop writing for a while, it's very easy for a week to turn into a month, to turn into 6 months. And you suddenly find that you haven't actually done any writing for 6 months. So yeah, it was a combination of things. And now I've got that momentum. I just keep writing and keep going.
I completely agree with you, and I listen to all of those podcasts each week also, and it's so refreshing to get other people's insight and input, and to hear other people's success stories, and and I may not take any of the advice that a person gives about how they had success or whatever, but man, the because it may not fit my particular situation, but just the motivation that I get from hearing other people that have succeeded, and it is invaluable to me. You mentioned your wife a minute ago. How important is it to have that support at home for an author who's trying to make it?
I think it's critical. I think, especially if you've got a day job, you've you've got to essentially carve out time to do your writing. And particularly if you want to write a novel, that's a lot of time. And then you've got to edit it, and you've got submission, you've got the highs and lows of rejection and acceptance, and or they want a full manuscript, or if you're indie publishing, you've got to go through all that process. It takes time, and it takes money as well. And I think you've got to have someone who at the very least understands how important it is to you. I'm extremely lucky. I can come home, at 7 o'clock after work and just say hi, grab some food, and then disappear into my office for a couple of hours and write. And then she'll gladly take the story that I've written and read it and give me feedback or proofread it for me and read things 3 or 4 times to try and catch errors before I send them off before I send it off to an editor. So, I think you definitely need that person because you're going to have to make sacrifices. You're going to want to stay and write instead of go out. It's been a fantastic summer in Vancouver, but I've been editing books all summer. So I spent a lot of the weekends actually just sitting here editing, not out in the sun. Thankfully, my wife is very understanding, and we'll catch up one day.
That's great, and I love to hear you say that she proofreads your stuff and that you share that with her, because that has been very beneficial for me. Is that I bounce my ideas off my wife, and then during my editing process, I'll send my book to my Kindle and read it out loud to my wife and kids, and I think for a working writer who's especially if you have a day job, sharing that experience with your family lets them see what's coming of all this time that you're investing, and lets them feel a part of it. And I think it's a lot easier for your loved ones to get on board if you just take little steps like that to include them. That's great.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So what brought you to decide to indie publish some of your work? And I love to hear authors who are hybrid authors, because we do feature a lot of indie authors on this show, but I am by no means do I believe that's the only path to success into publishing, nor do I believe that traditional publishing is. I think now authors have the power to decide which one is better for them, and maybe on a project-by-project basis. And I just think that we're in a fantastic time now where the power is with the author and not with a handful of gatekeepers anymore. And each one, may be different. But what brought you to deciding to indie publish some of your work?
I completely agree. I mean, like I said, I've got short stories published in anthologies, and I still send short stories out and still get rejections. And as far as kind of switching and doing some indie stuff, it's another cliche, and it was Hugh Howey. But not so much his success, but just his enthusiasm for indie publishing.
Right.
He's just such a nice guy and so passionate about indie publishing, and it just made a lot of sense. And I had a huge barrier to overcome when it came to the indie publishing, because I'd grown up with traditional books for so long, and the way you got published was you got that validation from a gatekeeper.
Right.
And I'd been sending out so many stories, and at an open submission session, and I submitted it, and they rejected it, and I ran it past an editor who gave me some fantastic feedback, which was basically the 3 things why it was completely terrible, and I should rewrite it completely. And at first I was kind of like, this is what are you talking about? But he was right. I did go back and rewrite it, and I switched from third person to first person and everything. But there was this huge barrier between what I was writing and the belief that I should get people, try and get people to pay to read it, basically. And this kind of expectation that actually, unless someone else said this story was good enough, story was worthy, then I should just keep it to myself. And if I've got a story that an editor doesn't like, then it's not good. When in reality, that's not true at all. It's if an editor rejects a story, it's because that wasn't the right story for that time of day on that particular month in that particular year. And maybe they didn't have their coffee, and so they didn't enjoy it. And I found the reaction from my stories. I've kind of put out some short stories as a trial, but the positive feedback I get from them is like people like them and enjoy them. And they might never have found an editor. So I had this kind of barrier to get past, and Hugh's enthusiasm and just constantly kind of beating us around the head that indie publishing was the way to go, and there's no reason to be afraid to send your stories out, and let people decide whether or not they enjoy them or not. And if you send a story out and if you publish it and people don't like it, well, there you go, they didn't like it. And I think as long as you're editing properly, you've got a decent cover and you're proofreading it and that kind of thing, there's no reason not to put it out. And I kind of had this switch where I thought, I don't really know what triggered it. It just kind of clicked that actually, no, it doesn't make sense for have these gatekeepers. They're not the only people who decide what's a worthy book, as long as you're doing a good job. And I think that's the important thing. I use a lot of editors, and Unseen Planet went through, which is my latest one, that went through 2 editors, 3 sets of proofreaders. I did about 5 drafts, and my wife read it a couple of times, and it's not a case of, okay, I just write a story and throw it up. I could never do that. I have to believe that it's a good story. So it takes a while for me to go from story idea to getting it out on the shelf. But it just seems to make sense now. It was odd. I've worked in the games industry for a long time as well, and there's this idea of indie games, and I've run my own companies, and I've written games and sold them to people. But for some reason, the idea of writing a book and selling it to people was different. It was like books are a special thing, and they have to be judged worthy before anyone would want to buy them. And that's certainly not the case. And I think Hugh and the other blogs, and just seeing the way that the indie movement has gone, just kind of reminded me, and I made that connection between it's no different to an indie game. And that it was okay to just put books out and see what people thought.
One thing that I really appreciated about Hugh's championing indie publishing was his honesty about it. I think we all kind of watched this indie publishing boom several years ago, where you had the phenomenon of the Kindle 99-cent millionaires, and that was the new hot thing, and everybody's going to get rich, and Hugh kind of he validated indie publishing, but honestly, and there's he made it okay to understand that being a mid-list author is okay, and not only is it okay, that lots of people were having their own form of success there, and that really brought some validity to what he was saying, I think.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
helped to kind of bring some no-nonsense, bring a no-nonsense approach to it, and I really appreciate that. Tell me about The Girl in the City. That was kind of a jump for you, wasn't it? That going from kind of the horror or kind of more thriller type stories to writing something in the Pennsylvania universe?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that one of the challenges I've had actually with my indie career is I'm all over the place. When I was writing short stories, I would write out out horror. I'm a big fan of Clive Barker and Stephen King. And then, I would write science fiction, or I've written some that just I'm not even sure what they are. And when it came to indie publishing, it was kind of okay. Well, what sort of book should I write? But the Girl in the City was kind of it just stuck with me. I read Michael's Pennsylvania. It was around the time the fifth one came out, the fifth part came out, because I read the parts individually, but I read them basically back to back, and he just released the fifth one, and it just stuck with me. And I had this idea for mostly it was a character and a scene set kind of there's a pivotal moment in the book, and it's dealt with fairly briefly in Michael's book, but I had this idea of having that event and some time leading up to that event, but shown from a completely different perspective. And this idea of this particular character and what happened to them in basically the 18 hours or a day before that particular event, and just telling a story around that. And it just kind of stuck with me. And it wasn't something I was really going to write on. I was heading more into the darker stories, and it was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do this idea, but it just stuck with me. And then Michael commented, that he was happy for people to write in Pennsylvania universe, and I emailed him and said, I've got this idea, and I don't really know what's going to happen, but this is kind of vaguely what I'm thinking. And he's like, yeah, go and write it, and release it, sell it. So I did, and it turned into this novella, and it just kind of got bigger and bigger. And I ran it past an editor, and he did kind of a development edit and feedback. But his overall comment was, yeah, actually this is really good. You've got the right structure. You hit all the high points, and it's a real story kind of thing. You've got everything that you need. Here's just some things. Maybe you should think about this, think about that, and that kind of gave me enough encouragement to think, okay, well, maybe I should finish this, polish it, run it through an editor, get it proofread, and then release it, and just kind of see what happens. And I approached some people in the AZ Facebook group and got them to read it, and they really liked it. And the reaction's been really good, actually. People like it, and I'm toying with the idea of doing a sequel. People want more. So so it was. It was. I just couldn't resist. It was just an idea that kept bugging me and insisting that I write it. So in the end, I gave in and wrote it, and I was happy with the way it turned out.
Now, you said that your writing is all over the place, and what does it? How does it affect your storytelling and your planning for the future when you have something that's sort of out of character for you become successful and become really loved by people? What does that do for your for how you see yourself as a writer?
I think I'm quite stubborn, and I kind of ignore it in some ways. Girl in the City came out at the beginning of the year, and I'm only now thinking about writing it, and writing a sequel. And indie publishing is full of you have to have three books before anyone will take any notice of you. So, from a business point of view, I should have immediately written 2 sequels and put the three books out, and then an omnibus edition. That would be the right thing to do. But I see myself as I always call myself a speculative fiction author, and that to me covers a very broad range. I tend not to write kind of out and out fancy Tolkien-esque stuff, but other than that, it's science fiction or some horror and some just dark stuff that's kind of horror but kind of thrillery, but there's usually an element of speculative stuff as science fiction, or maybe it's supernatural or just weird kind of stories that are just not quite right. So to me, that's what I write. So it's fine for me to write an action adventure science fiction, and it's fine to me to write an out and out zombie novel. They're now, from a business point of view, that's maybe not smart, but that's always the way I've gone. I follow the ideas rather than do I fit in a particular genre? And that's how I see myself.
Yeah. Well, I love that speculative fiction label because you're right. That does give you a lot of options, and I know what you mean. That I can sit down and try to write any number of things, but it's always going to come out, with some weird supernatural thing that's happening in the background, and I mean, some things just always come up. Um, but tell me about, speaking of kind of going off track from from what you were doing previously. Tell me about Glitch Mitchell and the Unseen Planet. This book I picked up the other day and I began reading, and I'm loving it. It's fantastic, and you've got that iconic Mike Corley cover.
Yes, yes.
My wife was sitting across the room the other day when I went to your Amazon page and clicked by, and she said, "Oh, I love that Mike Corley cover."
Yes, yeah.
So,
yes.
Tell me about this book, where it came from, and how it's doing.
Yeah, I mean that Mike Corley cover was the best decision I ever made. It gets so much attention. That was actually
and let me just interject for just a second that the old adage, "You never judge a book by a cover," is absolutely wrong in the Amazon age.
Absolutely, absolutely.
If you're an author, that cover is essential.
Yes, yeah, and even my mum is actually more interested in reading the book now she's seen the cover.
Wow.
When I send her a picture, she's like, "Oh, I should read that," and it's kind of okay. So
thanks, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that I wrote it isn't enough, but it's got a good cover now. So, but yeah, so Unseen Planet really was an accident. I didn't mean to write that particular novel. I write every day, and to do that, obviously you need ideas, and I've got stacks and stacks of ideas. But you've kind of got to fit your ideas into some kind of plan, some kind of schedule. And I'd finished a novel called The Ghost Smuggler, which I haven't released yet. It's sort of science fiction, just about science fiction. And I always, when I finish a draft, I always put it in the cupboard for a couple of weeks, and then come back to it, and then read it, and then edit it, and work on it. And that's what I was doing with The Ghost Smuggler, and I needed something to fill in between that, during that 2 weeks. And I also wanted something to put on my website, something that was more interesting than me just talking about writing or stuff. So I had this idea of, maybe I would write kind of 10 pieces of flash fiction that were interconnected, and I would release one a week. And I loved, when I was a kid, I used to watch the old black and white Flash Gordon serials on television. They seemed to be on every year, every summer and every Christmas, and the BBC would put on for during the school holidays, they'd put on Tarzan films and Zorro and the Lone Ranger and Flash Gordon, and every morning that's what we watched. And I used to love those Flash Gordon films, serials, and I loved the film from the 80s. And so I had this idea of, I would write a Flash Gordon style serial, and I would post it on my website, one episode a week, just these 1,000-word Flash stories, and there would be a cliffhanger at the end of each one, just like the old serials, and that would fill in the couple of weeks before I went back to The Ghost Smuggler and finished that. And then as I thought about the idea a bit more, I decided that actually 10 episodes wasn't enough for people to really discover it. No one's going to come back after 10 weeks. That's not long enough. So I'll do 26. And that'll be 6 months. So that's enough time for people to actually find the story. And 1,000 words seemed a bit short. So I'd up to 1,500. And then I wrote the first chapter, and it was 3,500 words. And I was just loving it. And
it was accidentally becoming a novel, wasn't it?
And I wrote, I got about 10 chapters in, and it's like, okay, so this is now a novel, because this is going to hit 65,000 words, and I was really enjoying it. So I wrote it, and I did my usual thing, and I finished it, and I put it in a cupboard, and I edited it again, and I went through an editor again, got feedback, and then I kind of coming back to the point of, it's a different type of story. I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Should I just put it up on my website? Should I release it as a novel? What should I do? And then I was reading Hugh Howey's blog again, and he talked about this new artist that he discovered, Mike Corley. And so I went and looked at his website. I was like, oh, he could do a really good cover for that glitch novel I've got. So I emailed him and said, could you do a cover that is kind of like the old movie posters? And he did this fantastic cover, at which point I was like, well, I should probably publish this book. Now I've got this amazing cover. And so I revised it again, and I went through editors again, and eventually, it's probably a good 9 months, maybe even longer, after I got the cover. I was actually happy with the book. That I felt that the cover was, the book was worthy of the cover, and then put it out. So again, it wasn't something that I planned to do. It just kind of stuck with me, and I was enjoying myself. And feedback from people who read it, from proofreaders and editors, was very positive about it. Everyone really got the gist of what I was trying to do and enjoyed it. So basically, I had to release it.
I love that story, and it's fantastic. Are you getting some good feedback on the book?
Yes. Reaction's been very good, actually. It's been doing well on Amazon, and obviously the cover helps. It's kind of an uphill battle because it's standalone. It could be a series, but it's standalone at the moment. It's not my normal sort of thing. It's kind of young adulty science fiction, although I don't think it's technically, you don't have to be a young adult to enjoy it. Lots of people are enjoying it. And it's doing well. It was hanging out in I think it was number 15 in the alien science fiction chart on Amazon for quite a while, which I was pretty happy with. All the other 19 titles in that top 20 were all sequels. So to be the only kind of standalone book was pretty good. And yeah, the reaction's been very good. So hopefully it will continue.
Do you have another adventure for Glitch Mitchell?
I actually have a short story planned from an upcoming anthology, which isn't until next year, but that I just happened to see this call out for an anthology, and it just fits the characters from Unseen Planet perfectly. And there is a temptation, even though again it's not really the direction that I planned, but there is a temptation to write another one because it was so much fun. And there's a nice structure to it. The cliffhanger, every chapter is a cliffhanger, and that kind of thing makes it really fun to write, and in a way easier to write because the structure is defined for you. You know that there's a cliffhanger at the end, and then the beginning of the chapter, they get out of that, but then things get even worse. So, and it just builds up and up throughout the book. So it's a fun one to write. So I suspect I'll come back to it at some point, but not immediately.
I think a lot of readers are really in tune with that episodic serialization kind of structure. There's so many people that are that use Netflix and will wait for a TV show to complete a whole season, then go to Netflix and just binge watch it through. I see a benefit to structuring books that way, and people are more in tune to consuming it that way.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I just kind of thought of that correlation as we were talking. Yeah, that's interesting. Anyway,
yeah.
where is the oddest place that an idea for a story has come from for you?
Wow, that's a good question. It's actually really hard. My stories I quite often start with just titles, or just kind of trying to come up with a random title that sounds interesting, or lines from songs and things like that. Or sometimes it will just be an image. It's usually when I'm lying in bed and things get very, very weird. There's apparently, and I'm not an expert on this, but there's various stages you go to on your way to going to sleep between being awake and being asleep. And one of them is this kind of this state where you kind of hallucinate things. And I went for a long time. I used to hallucinate stuff all of the time. And I have an idea which I haven't used in a story yet. But I woke up one night and suddenly dragged my wife out of bed because there was a giant stone scorpion in our bedroom. And I literally dragged her out of the room because I was convinced that this giant scorpion was going to get us. So I haven't put a giant scorpion. I should have put a giant scorpion in Glitch book, actually, because that would have fitted perfectly. But those kind of things definitely feed into it. But sometimes it will just be, I tend to come up with something and then just associate and build up on that. I'll see a nice pre-made covers are a really good way of doing it. I'll see a cool pre-made cover and then think, okay, well, if I had that, what story could I write behind it? And work from there. I bought a Jason Gurley pre-made cover that I don't have any idea what the story is yet, but it's a really nice cover. So I will probably write something to fit with that.
Jason's a fantastic guy too.
Yes.
You could get lots of ideas by just browsing Jason's stuff.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah.
Philip, this has been an awesome hour. Thanks for coming on the show with me. What are you excited about next? What's coming up that people can be looking forward to from you?
So I'm actually working on a novel in the Apocalypse Weird universe.
Nice.
So the working title of that is Siren's Call. It's set in London, and that's currently with the editor at the moment. So we'll see what they think of that. But that was another fun one. That started with this kind of image of this kind of rusting cruise ship smashing through Tower Bridge in London, and then running aground and all these kind of creatures. We've got that coming up at some point. And then at the moment I'm working on just complete opposite of Glitch, which is a set of zombie stories, which are a lot darker and proving good fun.
Awesome. Where can people connect with you and read your blog, find out about new projects, and all that good stuff?
So I have a website at solitarymindset.com. I'm on Twitter at solitarymindset. My Facebook page is facebook.com/solitarymindset. So basically, if you search for Solitary Mindset, you'll generally find me.
Excellent. And do you have a mailing list?
Yep, you can sign up for that on the website, and I actually give away my 4 short stories that I published, and you actually get a whole mix there. There's a Bottle Lightning, which is a science fiction story. You've got Curfew, which is kind of a dark kind of thriller, Savior, which is sort of a young adult urban fantasy, I guess, and then Only Friends, which I've got no idea really what that is. It could be literary fiction. Some people interpret it as a purely literary story. I wrote it more speculative with more of a supernatural element, but people get different things from it. And yeah, anyone who signs up to those gets all 4 of those.
But it's a great sampler of your work.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Philip, for taking time out of your Saturday to come on the show. I appreciate it, and I'll put links to all your stuff there in the show notes where people can connect with you.
Great. Thanks very much for having me on.